instructors is in the room with us. Sam Allison certainly doesn't remember, but he taught me many years ago. So it's great to see you. And we also have Benoit and Joseph as well, and perhaps other historians on the call. And I will count on you to jump in if any of my facts are incorrect. I'm not a professional historian. I did study in history. I did an undergrad at Western and a master's at UQAM, but I'm a PR consultant primarily, specializing in digital communications. So this is where two of my interests meet. I'm very interested in history, obviously, in the Laurentians, of which I am now a citizen for the past 7 years, and interested in PR and advertising. So when Chloe asked me to do a presentation, I thought that this might be of interest to you, and I hope that is the case. So today we're going to be talking about marketing the Laurentians. Again, the overview, we're going to be looking at some of the people who were instrumental in developing the tourism industry here in the Laurentians, some of the movers and shakers, and some of the things that they did from a PR or marketing perspective, advertising perspective, to help get the word out. They were, of course, independent businessmen, but they were joined by the government, who also promoted this tourist industry. So we'll talk about that as well. So we're going to start quite early and meet some of those people that were really instrumental in developing that here in the Laurentians. As I said, I'm a PR consultant. I've been doing it for over 20 years now, I would say. I've also taught at Université de Montréal and at McGill. I taught media relations at UDM, and I taught digital communications at McGill. So hopefully that will show in today's presentation. The other part of me that comes in here is that I'm the proud owner of the land on which Chalet Cochand once stood. You may have visited it yourself back in the day, or you may have heard about it. It was one of the very early ski resorts here in the Laurentians, and quite influential. I've done most of my research around Chalet Cochand, so you'll see a lot of my own ephemera, my own material that I've collected over the years, but I will be talking about other resorts as well. And finally, just on me, I guess I'm getting to the age where I'm looking to make a move away from digital communications, which I'm starting to find a little boring, frankly. And I'm bringing together my interests in technology and history. And just before COVID hit, of course, I did this was a bit of a test project, which is still active. It's called He Said, She Said Stories. And basically the idea is to do projects with couples that might like to be interviewed to share their personal histories. So it's a very small initiative, but something that is meant to test the market and also have me starting to work in a field that really interests me. So if you are interested in hearing more about it, please don't hesitate to contact me. Okay, so let's get started. These are some of the ladies and gentlemen that we will be meeting today. Some of them may look familiar to you. Others you may be hearing about for the first time. They were the movers and shakers of their day. You would have definitely heard about them if you were living in the first part of the 20th century, but unfortunately some of these names are becoming less and less well known today. Just quickly, left to right along the top, we have Lauren McGibbon from the Laurentide Inn in Sainte-Adèle. In the middle, we have Émile Cochand, Chalet Cochand, which was referred to as St. Margaret's Station, but basically Chalet Cochand was literally on the border of Sainte-Adèle and Sainte Marguerite. We have George Wheeler, who along with his family ran the Grey Rocks Inn. Vernon Carty, bottom left there, purchased, he didn't found, but he purchased the Alpine Inn, and we'll talk about his tenure there a little while later. Gia Ratelle is a name you might recognize. You might also recognize the character standing behind him, and we'll talk a bit about Monsieur Ratelle and Bonhomme Carnaval a little later on. He was instrumental in the Carnaval Laurentien, which was the Carnaval in Sainte-Adèle. And then finally, we'll talk about Joe Ryan, who helped develop Tremblant. And there are many, many more that we can talk about, and we will mention some other names in the presentation. You know, this is not meant to be an exhaustive overview of the history of tourism in the Laurentians either. It really is a look at some of the tourist pieces that were produced, and we'll be discussing that. So just a bit of an overview, very, very summary overview so that you get an idea of the history. We know that the Laurentians wasn't really a developed area. It started to be developed in the mid 1800s. Curé Labelle was instrumental in opening up the Laurentians. The church wanted a way to encourage French Canadians not to emigrate to New England. And so by opening this up as what was meant to be farm and kind of lumber area to supply Montreal and create jobs in this area began around the mid 1800s. With that, and again, Curé Labelle really pushed for this, was the development of the train, and that's super important for the development of the Laurentians. We'll talk about that a little bit later, touch upon that. Another important period for the Laurentians was the development of a health and wellness industry around tuberculosis. So between 1892 and 1911, there were quite a few spas and hospitals established in the Laurentians, and the idea was that people really believed that the fresh air of places like Sainte-Adèle could really help cure tuberculosis and other types of pulmonary diseases. So all this, you know, started to create a bit of a buzz around the Laurentians. And by 1910, there were quite a few wealthy families from Montreal and the Northeast United States that actually had secondary residences along, you know, the shores of places like Sainte-Agathe, Lac des Sables. From our perspective, we're going to be looking a lot at kind of winter ski resorts. So in 1911, you have an important moment in that evolution, and that was when Émile Cochand was recruited to head up the ski school at the Laurentide Inn. So he was a ski champion in Switzerland and was recruited to come over, and ended up spending the rest of his life here in Quebec. And we'll definitely be speaking about him later. Then we had World War I that hit, and a lot of these resorts, the resorts that did exist, were converted into kind of, you know, to house the military and things like that. So that first kind of tourist blip calmed down with World War I. But then after the war, when we look at the 1920s and 1930s, it's really when the ski rush started to develop here in the Laurentians. By now you had the railroad, you had a way to get up from Montreal, and you had quite a few lodges that were starting to spring up to help welcome skiers, and skiing was becoming a much more popular sport by then. So by now, by the 1920s, 1930s, the Laurentians are officially a tourist destination. And this is when you have I don't know if you've ever seen the photos, but there's a great picture of the skiers in the train that would bring them up. So it was actually a double-engine ski train that went through the Laurentians, and there were about 20 or 30 coaches, and those were all filled with skiers coming up to take advantage of this new popular sport. And then we have World War II. World War II obviously would have an impact. After World War II, you really have another tourist boom as well. 1947, you have the carnival in Sainte-Adèle, that takes off. And then by the 50s, now we're talking about automobile traffic. You have Highway 11, and the Laurentians enter a new phase as far as their evolution goes. So that's just a bit of an overview. We're really talking about early 20th century here. Okay, so let's talk about one of these resorts. Grey Rocks was the first kind of big hotel winter resort. It was founded by George and Lucille Wheeler, who had actually come from the States. Mr. Wheeler, probably Mrs. Wheeler, who came from a family of means, wasn't really expecting this kind of lifestyle, but Mr. Wheeler was big into adventure, and a lot of Americans were attracted by the big outdoors that Quebec and the Laurentians represented. So he came up and actually launched a lumber mill and worked on that. This what became Grey Rocks was the family home, and they worked on, you know, they had children, and the lumber industry was their business. But what happened was that George contracted typhoid on a business trip to Chicago, and that really changed everything for him. So the family needed to look for a new way to make a living. And what they decided to do was take their quite substantial home and turn it into an inn. And so, you know, whereas before they had welcomed family and friends, now this was becoming a business enterprise for them. So it became a paying inn. And the cost to stay there, just a fun fact, cost to stay there was $1 a day. And their operating costs weren't too bad because they had children, and the children helped take care of the business and run the business. It actually ended up being a business over 3 generations. So a bit of an empire, family empire here. So the hotel attracted guests from Eastern Canada, from the United States, and they would come to do some snowshoeing, to do some cross-country skiing. It was a lovely site right on Lac Ouimet. And so this became a destination, a tourist destination for a certain group of people. The Wheelers, as I said, were a family. They had, I think it was 3 children, if I'm not mistaken, 2 boys and a girl, although there might have been more girls. And they were innovators. Just to give you an idea, when Bell Canada started to put up their telephone lines, they were not going to include Grey Rocks in their plans. And Wheelers obviously weren't very happy about that. And so what they did is they bought their own poles, and they created their own telephone company. So just to give you a sense of the kind of family we're talking about. From a marketing perspective, one of the things that they innovated in was the development of what they called the ski week package. That was in 1951, and that was under one of the under the management of one of the sons, Harry. And the ski week package is basically like today's all-inclusive. And so they taught skiing at an affordable price. And that marketing strategy was really very successful. And it was a kind of copied by other resorts in the area. And so Grey Rocks really became and maintained their place as a major destination for Americans who would come for the local ski school and for all the great services that Grey Rocks offered. Another kind of marketing initiative that they took advantage of was the fact that one of their sons, Tom Wheeler, was a World War I vet. He was in the U.S. Air Corps and an avid flyer. And he bought a plane, a Curtiss Jenny, in 1921. And that became the first of a fleet of planes. So he had his own airline. And the Jenny actually was a marketing tool as well, used by Grey Rocks. It attracted a lot of attention. And in the winter, he would remove the wings and he would use it for something called ski joring, which is kind of like aquaplaning. And there were also movie companies that took advantage of the fleet and the location. The Grey Rocks hosted Lionel Barrymore. He's quoted as saying at one point, apparently he couldn't sleep. Now, I don't know if you know much about Lionel Barrymore. The family is problematic, perhaps we can say. Lionel Barrymore was pacing the floor all night, and so Tom asked him, if everything was okay, and his quote is saying, "The days are fine, but the nights are hell." So you can imagine, I mean, it was obviously a great hotel, but very remote in the wilderness. It was obviously for American tourists quite a departure from, say, New York or other major American cities. So quite the adventure for visitors. The next mover and shaker I want to introduce you to is Lorne McGibbon. He is behind the Laurentide Inn. So this is in Sainte-Adèle. He was a very wealthy Montreal businessman. He actually owned Stonehaven Manor, which you may know. He owned, in fact, 525 acres in Sainte-Adèle. So Stonehaven Manor, which he later sold to the Pères des Oblats, to the religious organization. But he also owned what we now call the Théâtre du Patriote, so the theater in Sainte-Adèle. Those were his experimental stables. So quite a large domain. He had actually come and kind of been attracted to Sainte-Adèle because of health issues that he had. And he was behind the Laurentian sanitarium. He convinced the local authorities, who were kind of really reticent about having sanitariums pop up in Sainte-Adèle because they were afraid of attracting people who were sick, obviously, which would have happened, but creating a situation of contagion in the community. And McGibbon flew them to Saranac Lake, which was the kind of the model for the sanitarium, and convinced them that it was a good idea. So they agreed to it. I don't know if you can hear the house alarm that's going off in the background. I think my mother's opened a door that she wasn't supposed to, so that should disappear in a second. So the Laurentide Inn, he built it as the first winter, as one of the first winter resorts in North America. And as I mentioned before, he and his manager, Ernest Desbaillet, were the ones, along with some movers and shakers as well in Montreal, to bring Émile Cochand over. So this is where the ski school was held under Cochand's direction. Now, for the next little bit, I'm going to ask Joseph and others if they can confirm for me, because this I'm not sure. So we have the Laurentide Inn, founded by Lorne McGibbon. What we have as well is a Laurentide Inn, which later on would have been owned by a person named Louis Stoner. So I'm presuming that after McGibbon's death, or before perhaps, it was sold to Louis Stoner. But where I'm confused is that when I'm reading, I see that McGibbon, it always says that McGibbon founded the Laurentide Inn, but I have it under another name, which was Murray's Inn. And the reason I'm bringing this up is there's a kind of a fun story behind it. But first, I wonder if Joe can come off mute and tell me whether he knows for sure that Murray's Inn, which became the Laurentide Inn, is the same Laurentide Inn as McGibbon's. There were two Laurentide Inns in Sainte-Adèle, which would surprise me, but I suppose is possible.
I will try to the best of my recollection. The first Laurentide Inn was right up near where the hospital is, and what happened there was that when the war started, they converted it into rooms for the hospital, and that's why Cochand had to leave. Basically, there was nothing for him to do there, and so the Laurentide Inn died during the war and was resurrected later. And so,
Okay.
I went through this with Duff Mitchell. We did a whole search together, and I could have some of my facts wrong too, but I can dig them up and send them to you for your information. It's a fascinating story, and it took us a dog's age to try to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, well that might explain it then. So there would have been a first incarnation of the Laurentide Inn under McGibbon. And then what happened is in the late 20s, sorry, in the early 30s, so obviously after the war, if what Joe said is correct, the first Laurentide Inn would have perhaps closed. And then there was something called Murray's Inn, which was literally right in downtown Sainte-Adèle. It was at the corner of Saint-Vincent and Principal, called the Murray Inn, quite a well-known hotel. And it was owned, as I say, by a Louis Stoner. So Louis Stoner hired a guy named Ken Anderson, whose family was in the kind of hotel business, although they had a very modest hotel at Lac Mercier near Mont-Tremblant. He hired him to take over the running of Murray's Inn. And as I say, it was at the corner of Saint-Vincent and Principal. And Harrison wanted to move it to a better location. So what he did is he actually moved the building. He moved the hotel. In order to do that, he cut the hotel into two sections, and those were drawn by horses to a lakeside location and renamed the Laurentide Inn. And this became, with time, obviously evolved and additions were added, considered a very modern and very popular place to stay in Sainte-Agathe. So very odd little story. But again, Harrison was an out-of-the-box thinker. Obviously, this stunt, if you will, would have attracted some media attention and kind of established him as part of the resort associations, community members. And we'll talk about him a little later when we talk about the development of the roads, but I wanted to introduce him to you here. From the marketing perspective, what we're talking about in the 20th century in general are posters. Posters were one of the main ways that that hotels or resorts or government could promote a destination. And with posters, we're selling the dream, right? So from the late 1800s until about 1950, it was really the most common way for travel agencies to reach their customers. And poster art at that time was very, very colorful. It was an art form. I think we kind of recognize the style. I don't know if you're like me, but we could, even if it didn't say ski, we would recognize it. The similar kinds of posters were done in Europe as well for their ski destinations. So there was definitely a signature here, very, very colorful. And this was before the age of television, don't forget. So you had travel posters in public spaces, in travel agencies, at the dock, at the airport, at the train station, anywhere where people would travel or dream about traveling. So with anything else, we talked about the war and depression with all of these moments in history that slow down tourism. There was a slowing down of the popularity, obviously, of the posters that went with that. But after World War II, travel posters came back, the 1940s, 1950s. And still, I would say, will remain. We will still, for the few travel agencies that we can still see that are still bricks and mortar, they do play an important part. But they were very illustrative in the first part of the 20th century, whereas, say, by the 1960s or so, we're really talking about color photography in a completely different style. So what we're looking at here is that first part of the 20th century aesthetic. And sorry, I just wanted to pull up a couple of examples. So what we have in the Laurentians are similar types of posters, if you will. You have a couple of them on the screen, but this one here is for Chalet Cochand. So it's a brochure, but on this side, you know, have a poster that you can put up on the wall. And so the resorts were creating these for their customers, as well as for travel agencies and things like that. So they could be informational on one side, and a poster on the other. Any questions so far before we go on to the Alpine Inn? I don't see the chat, so you'll have to jump in, Chloe, if you see anything.
There's nothing in the chat. I would interrupt you at a moment I
Okay.
see fit if there are any.
Okay, fabulous. Yeah, feel free to stop me, ask any questions, in particular about anything that you see. So Alpine Inn was something that actually started by somebody named Tom Potter, who was you know, part of that early wave of entrepreneurs. But I want to talk to you about Vernon Carty. Vernon Carty bought the Alpine Inn. Rumor has it that he and perhaps his wife were vacationing there, and they met a family that would play an important role in their lives a little later on. And so he eventually purchased the Alpine Inn. He was from a hotel family. His father owned hotels in Ontario. He was also a very avid horseman. So really kind of part of the social elite, if you will. He had come up through the Ritz-Carlton. He had been a director of the Mount Royal Hotel on Peel Street in Montreal. He went bankrupt. You know, it's kind of, you know, playing around with some big money. Went bankrupt around 1919. And then came back, and with his wife's money was able to actually acquire and develop a chain of hotels. And so he developed what was called the Carty Hotels Corp. So at its height, that chain of hotels included 8 hotels, and among them was the Alpine Inn. So let's take a look at some of the material that he's developing from a marketing perspective. So you can see here that you have the Carty chain of hotels, and featured down at the bottom is the Alpine Inn. So something that really shows that you're, you know, it's kind of like, I suppose, when you go to the Marriott or the Sheraton, is that you, with the name comes a certain guarantee of quality. So the idea and marketing of grouping all of these together is to show that this is a very professional and well-established chain of hotels. And then to your right there, you have an example of one of the ads. So for a perfect weekend, the Carty Alpine Inn. So again, from marketing perspective, leveraging the name Carty, which would have been recognizable because of the chain of hotels. And then, you know, outlining all the features, a TV in every cottage, dinner music and dancing nightly. So quite a few wonderful benefits to staying at the Alpine Inn. And if you look, the Alpine Inn was very prolific in the production, especially of postcards. And you'll see that among the different activities, you had horseback riding, you had golf, you had, you know, swimming, anything that could distract you for a week or a weekend, you would find at the Alpine Inn. I include the photo in the middle there. This is Mr. Carty a little later in life. As I mentioned, the Alpine Inn was a bit of a sweet spot for him because it was there that he would meet his second wife. Unfortunately for the first Mrs. Carty, he met a family called the Fergusons, and that included twin girls. It was a bit of a scandal because people weren't so sure that the relationship was a healthy one, in the sense that he was a married man and there was more than 20 years difference between the twins and Mr. Carty. Eventually, he did make a respectable woman out of one of them and married one of the twin sisters. But this is, just to give you a sense of the kind of personality that we're talking about. So he was described as prim and self-absorbed horse breeder. So he was really into his horses. Apparently, he had a penchant for pretentious portraits. In fact, you'll find some of those online. And he enjoyed life. He enjoyed life. He's quoted as saying, "There's nothing so good for the inside of a man as the outside of a horse." Unfortunately, he did go through a bitter divorce, and his hotel empire suffered because of it. So Mr. Carty's stint at the Alpine Inn didn't last forever, but he certainly made a remarked stop there.
I had a question in the
yes,
chat.
yes.
Where was the Alpine Inn located?
The Alpine Inn is actually still there. It's one of the hotels that has survived. The building has survived, and it has just reopened in the last maybe 3 or 4 years as a hotel. I'm not too sure what the status is, although I do see groups going there every once in a while in buses. It's in Sainte-Adèle. As you drive along Pierre Peladeau towards Sainte-Marguerite, you'll see it on the right, and it's a largest hotel. That's a Boiron log hotel, dark brown logs. So it's quite. You'll notice it for sure if you drive by. And on the other side is the golf course. So a little farther up, I think, or back. Around there is the golf course as well. And farther along Pierre Peladeau, or that road was Chalet Cochand. So right as you drive from Sainte-Adèle along Pierre Peladeau and you get to the border of Sainte-Marguerite, you'll get to my land. And on there, you will still see some of the homes, the log cabins or log homes that were part of Chalet Cochand. So Chalet Cochand was not only the hotel that you see here, but several individual buildings for families. I own what was apparently the honeymoon suite, the smallest of the houses. And unfortunately, Chalet Cochand is no longer standing. What you will see is the parking lot is still there, and it is used now by skiers who go up and use the maple leaf trails that were developed in part, with the cooperation of owners like Cochand by Jack Rabbit Johansson. So still in use and still very, very popular. Emile Cochand had come, as I said, to be a ski instructor. He had been a ski champion in Switzerland. He came to Quebec at the invitation of some very rich Montreal business people and went to work at the ski school at the Laurentians Inn. Then World War I hit. In 1913, he met his wife, Léa, who was also Swiss. She had the advantage of being a cordon bleu. She was an excellent cook. And that would prove to be part of the success of Chalet Cochand later on. What happened is that Emile Cochand, when the war came and the hotel shut down, he's obviously out of work. He went out west to kind of, work there. That didn't work for him. So he came back and he had the idea of a ski resort. He had good connections with the kind of rich Westmount type community, Montreal Ski Club, etc. And with the help of some of those people, including somebody called Jack Kerr, who was the secretary of the Montreal Ski Club, he started to talk about his plans. And Jack Kerr said, listen, I have a property in Sainte Margaret Station, which is what that part of Sainte-Adèle would have been called or referred to as the time, not far from the train station. He said, why don't you come take a look? And Emile found some property, 500 acres, that had already a residence on it. Rumor has it that the home was built by and inhabited by a single woman. And the rumor in the village is that she was one of the king's, mistresses, and had to exile to Quebec. Now, God knows if that's true. But this woman had the building originally and would have lodgers. So hunters and trappers and things like that would stay there. Then it had belonged, I think, to a farmer, and Émile Cochand bought it from the farmer. It became the basis of what was to be his ski resort. The original building actually burned, and he rebuilt and built the hotel that you see now. It burnt because one of the servants took a straw mattress when they were cleaning and moved it and got it too close to the fire, and the entire place burned. You can imagine, I mean, at the time there was, no running water. Imagine trying to just eke out an existence in this area, which would have been very remote. It's quite impressive what these people were able to do to develop their tourism destinations. He's about 2 kilometers from the train station. So what he would do is he would send sleds, horse and sled, and people would disembark at the train station and would be piled in there with furs and driven out the 2 kilometers to the hotel. So very, very remote area. You can imagine you're not just going to go there for the weekend, right? So back in the day, you would stay a week, you would stay 2 weeks. This was meant to be a more substantial vacation than what would happen later on when the highway came in. So by 1936, he had a hotel that hosted, 70 tourists, 70 skiers. Léa Cochand would do the cooking. Again, she was really well known for her cooking. It was one of the major attractions of the hotel. That's what people would talk about, her fantastic cooking. Again, the story goes, and we have to ask the family, I suppose, to know if it really is true. But Léa Cochand would have been very heavily pregnant at one point. And I think it was with her last son. And so she was exceptionally, I think, by that time going to give birth at the hospital. But Émile Cochand brought her back because he had a large group of tourists that had shown up and they needed to be fed. So very heavily pregnant Léa Cochand, the first stages of labor, cooked a great meal and then went back and gave birth. So, tough people. Postcards are really important. I mentioned them very briefly before. They're important marketing material. All of the resorts develop them. You can find them now, and I have quite a collection. I would say I probably have about 50 postcards from Chalet Cochand, and I would say Alpine Inn was even more prolific. The postcard first started in like the mid 1800s. Around 1870s or so, and by the Austrian government was the first to kind of authorize this new form of mail that they would allow. By 1871, Canada and some European countries had authorized it, and by 1874, the United States. So by 1875, this is now standard. You have what we know to be the postcard, which is, I'll give you an example. Yeah, the divided back postcard. So you have this here, Chalet Cochand. You can see people are sunning themselves by a kind of an ice wall. A nice way to spend a sunny winter day like today. And then on the back, you would have what the divided back. So this idea that you could put a promotional image on the front and then write your message here and the address here was a new way of mailing that had to be authorized by the government. But once it was authorized, it became very, very popular because it was kind of a simple, quick way to send a message. It's a bit like Twitter today. If you want to jot off a quick message to somebody, the classic "wish you were here," you would pick up a postcard. From a marketing perspective, really interesting for places like Chalet Cochand. Here's another one here of the summer activities on the lake. So you can see, this is obviously a little later on, you can see there's some water skiing going on. But really, really important for them because it was a way for them to promote, to get free promotion, if you will, of their resort. So whether they sold these or handed them out to their guests, obviously right on the postcard, Chalet Cochand, Sainte-Marguerite, Quebec, Canada. And here, I don't know if you see it very well, but it's a really interesting postcard because Chalet Cochand actually at one point had a rodeo. So down near the lake, it's not obviously cleared for that anymore, but down by the lake at one point anyway, I don't know if it was just for summer or what, they actually ran a rodeo. So again, from a marketing perspective, really important way to get your name out there. Newspaper ads, again, very important, and pages, you know, you can look in old newspapers from the 30s, from the 40s. You'll have pages and pages of newspaper ads, and a lot of them for tourist destinations, a lot of them for all of the hotels in Laurentians. You'll see ads very similar to this one. This is obviously Chalet Cochand. I found this ad. You know, there were ads similar to this in the Montreal Gazette and the Ottawa Journal. So they're looking to bring in the urban tourists, but also places as far away as Brooklyn, Washington, D.C., North Carolina. So really going to get those American dollars and those American tourists, people who were looking for the great wild adventure of Quebec. The Quebec government also played a really important role in promoting the Laurentians. They started to advertise the Laurentians in the United States. They paid for that advertising, and that really made a difference. This is one example here, the Provincial Tourist Bureau promoting the Laurentians. So an entire booklet, we're talking like 32 pages of information that could have gone out to tourists, all paid for by the Quebec Tourist Board. They also developed roadmaps as the road system became more and more a factor in Quebec. They printed and promoted this. There was a ministry, they didn't have a tourism ministry at the time, but the Ministry of Roads and Mines, and they published newsletters about the state of the roads. They published road maps. The Quebec government in 1925 devoted $50,000, which obviously would have been a lot of money at the time, in order to train hoteliers through the Tourism Association. So there was a lot of promotion going on. There was a tourism bureau as of 1927. And in 1932, they started to open the physical tourist bureaus or tourist counters that we see today. So that's in the 30s. So before that, you know, tourism wasn't such a factor, but with all of this, Quebec really wanted to get into the game and encourage those dollars coming into the Laurentians. So between 1912 and 1934, so over a period of 22 years, they spent $150 million to improve their road system. And in 1934, they spent $200,000. Did I say million or did I say thousand? Yeah, $150 million for the road system and $200,000 to promote tourism through advertising, brochures, and other ephemera. And a lot of that obviously was targeting American tourists. Cochand is also a good, you know, my collection is Cochand. So this actually comes from the Historical Society in Sainte-Marguerite, l'Esterel. It's a, how do you say, a dishcloth? A tea towel I wrote. Tea towel. So you may have these at home. Even when I was younger, they were still kind of the thing. We have tea towels from trips to Ireland and things like this, but obviously at this time, much more popular. And here you have a tea towel that is directly promoting the Laurentians. And you can see the map from Shawbridge all the way up, you know, to Sainte-Adèle, Sainte-Agathe, and the Tremblant area. So these kinds of pieces would have been perhaps sold in the Cochand gift shop, along with some of these objects. So things like cufflinks and pins would have been popular. I have a keychain right here that was donated to the Historical Society by Claudia Jarman, who was a figure at Chalet Cochand. these pieces again are all promotional. People would have bought them, just like when we go to a museum now, we might buy a bag from the Musée des Beaux-Arts, but that helps in the promotion of the museum. Well, this is very similar, and obviously they would have given them away as gifts as well. Chloe, I don't know what time you wanted to end because it's 10 to 4, 10 to 2. No, 10 to, yeah, 10 to 2. Do we have half an hour or so left, or how much time might we have?
For me, from my side, you can go as long as you like. So please don't feel pressured to go quicker, and take your time.
Okay, great. If anybody does need to leave, please don't hesitate. I won't be insulted, but make sure you ask your questions before you go. Fritz and Marily Shannon were part of Chalet Cochand. Fritz was a ski instructor, but beyond that, they were Chalet Cochand's entertainment for a while. It was a Swiss family business, and the Swiss theme permeated. They had St. Bernard dogs. They had the casks of whiskey around the neck. At Chalet Cochand on the National Day for Switzerland, they had a big community event. And it was a huge deal, a huge party on that day. So this was part of their signature from a marketing perspective. And Fritz Shannon and his wife contributed to that. As I said, they were not only the ski instructor, but also the entertainment. What you have here in front of you is this record that was produced. And on the back, you have a lot of promotion of Chalet Cochand. And not only that, but you see here that you can hear Fritz Shannon on Radio 98 CKGM, Greater Montreal, the Golden Modulation Station. So you can imagine, I don't know if you can guess what kind of music this is, but this is Swiss yodeling music. And I thought that I would play you a little bit. I don't know what the sound quality will be like. Hopefully it's okay. It'll just be a few bars just to give you a sense of what it would have been like to spend an evening in Chalet Cochand. Can you yodel like a Swiss girl on the mountains yodel? Can you whistle like a Swiss girl on the mountains yodel? Okay, so you have Fritz and Marly entertaining you. And as I say, this would have been a marketing piece as well. Not only would the record have been sold, but on the back, you have literally a call to action to people. It says, come ski with us. So it's only 3.5 air hours from New York, 45 minutes and 45 miles on the new thruway from Montreal, and you arrive at Chalet Cochand Ski Resort. So it's a record, but it's also a marketing piece. So that's kind of fun. What may seem surprising to us today, other ways to promote Chalet Cochand. The Cochands were actually quite well known within skiing circles. Émile Cochand had been a ski champion, and all of his children, most of his children competed. Louis Cochand, who ended up taking over the hotel, was an excellent skier, a champion skier as well. What we see here are 3 members of the Cochand family promoting Chesterfield cigarettes. Probably wouldn't see that today, but when you know the history of cigarettes in the United States and elsewhere, this would have been at a time where perhaps just before the time of the hearings for the tobacco industry really trying to make the argument that smoking was good for you. So to pair it up with athletes of this caliber would have been a good move for them. And it would have been a way as well for Cochand to continue to promote their family empire and their hotel. And so, like with most places, whether they were bars, restaurants, or hotels, you had matchbooks. And so you see one for Chalet Cochand here, and others for different hotels, Laurentide Inn, Alpine Inn, etc. So these, you know, matchbooks like this, again, important marketing piece when you think about it. And we don't think about it so much because we're not smoking as much as we used to. But, you know, if we were living 50 or 70 years ago, a lot of us would have this in our back pocket, in our purse. We would take it out, we would leave it behind. So it's a reminder of where we've been. And as we leave it behind, perhaps we leave a half empty matchbook at a table at a bar. Well, it's a piece that will be picked up by others as well, who might take a look, might see that Chalet Cochand, summer or winter, spring or fall, St. Margaret's Station, close cover before striking. So you have your matchbook there. So again, an important marketing piece. Let's talk about Louis Cochand. As I said, he was one of the Cochand sons. He took over the hotel side. Another son took over the hills across the lake, Émile Cochand Jr. And I think the father was trying to get the two sons to collaborate, which didn't always work particularly well. But Louis Cochand was quite well suited in a way to run the hotel. He was very sociable. His wife, Morna McLean, was from a very prominent Montreal family, also very kind of fashionista type. And so I wasn't surprised to find them here on the cover of Town and Country. There were, you know, skiing was becoming so popular that now there were couturiers who were developing ski outfits. You know, before you might have just skied in your regular clothes and kept warm as much as possible, but now there were professional looking type ski clothes. And here we have Louis and his wife, Morna, modeling that for us. So again, kind of a media savvy move to have themselves on the cover, promoting themselves as glamorous, fashionable, etc. Chalet Cochand was also media savvy in a way that probably other hotels did as well. I haven't found them yet. But this again was donated to the Historical Society. Their press releases, basically, and they would have come out every week. I have a few options, a few examples here. Put out by Charles E. Townsend from Montreal. It was called the Laurentian Mountain News. So just an example, you know, January 7th, 1955, Montreal, Quebec. Year's end holiday housing at the top ski resorts north of Montreal was perhaps best illustrated by the plight of the PR representative of several of same. He couldn't find bunk room with his clients. Indeed, one resort resorted to the expedient of hiring a commercial hotel several miles distant to accommodate its overflow of U.S. ski guests. And this is a 3-page press release. And at the bottom is a suggestion, why not post this copy of LSN on your bulletin board? So not only did they want the media to pick it up, they wanted it to be posted. And you had the results of some of the ski races that had been held. So I can tell you that in the girls' slalom, first was in the 11th to 12 year group, Heather McCullough at 51.8, which I presume is her speed. So good for her. So media savvy for sure. Press releases would have been important as well. I want to talk again very briefly, but I don't think we can go through this without mentioning Joe Ryan, who was instrumental in developing Tremblant. He was an American, again, had come to Quebec, had actually been introduced to the area by Tom Wheeler. There are actually two versions of this story. One was that he accompanied Lowell Thomas, who was, I think, a photographer or journalist or something like that, to the Laurentians. And when he got to the top of the ski hill, he said, "This has to be the most beautiful sight in the world. There's only one thing wrong. It's too difficult getting up here. I believe I'll fix that." And the fixing that he did was to start the development of what would be Tremblant hotel resort. Other version of the story is that Thomas Wheeler and Lowell Thomas were flying with him in a plane. He flew over the area and was really excited by what he saw. So at that time, the land belonged to the Quebec government. He wanted the land. He started to negotiate with the Quebec government. Duplessis' government was not that keen on selling it to him, but he got some of his influential friends to put in a good word for him. And he did end up buying that land and developing it. He's shown here with his wife, Mary. Mary was also instrumental in helping to support the development of the resorts, and she ran the hotel. After he died, he passed away tragically. He fell out of a building in New York or Chicago, in the States anyway. And so she was left widowed with a son, and together they ran the hotel and ski races and things like that to attract people to Tremblant. And with her son Peter's help, they were the first to have their ski report aired on Montreal morning radio. So again, marketing, when you appear on the morning show in Montreal, it's a great boost for your business. So she was quite savvy that way. So, again, a wealthy American who saw potential in developing the resort. He introduced the first, well, this is always disputed, but anyway, a chairlift on the south side of his mountain, and then an even longer chairlift on the north side. He had rope tows. He built 40 miles of downhill trails, hotels, an entire the Tremblant complex that we know today got its start with him. He was quite a difficult man, apparently, but obviously a man of a vision, and we have Tremblant now to show for it. I won't quote this because I think we're running out of time, but there are some really, really interesting articles about tourism in the Laurentians, a couple of them in Maclean's that you'll find online, and maps like this accompanied them. But they were very, very poetic, very colorful in their description of all of the pleasures that you can enjoy in the Laurentians. It was really promoted and even by journalists would describe it as a winter wonderland, a place for pleasure, for fun. So an aspirational place. I do want to talk about Ratelle. Ratelle is an important figure in Sainte-Adèle. After World War II, 1947, was the first carnival in Sainte-Adèle, the Laurentian, the Carnaval Laurentien. There had already been a carnival in Montreal. That ended up petering out after a few years. Obviously, the big carnival in Quebec City that we know now. And the bonhomme that we see behind might remind you of the bonhomme from the carnival in Quebec City. In fact, and again, people from Quebec will probably dispute this, but in Sainte-Adèle, we're clear. Bonhomme Carnaval was actually designed in Sainte-Adèle, and the proof is that he was modeled after Ratelle. And Ratelle was, again, a visionary. He was the figure behind the carnival. One of the things that he did was, I'll just skip ahead a couple here. One of the things that he did was actually go down to Times Square, and he brought an entire entourage with him, and they kind of replicated winter in the Laurentians, the winter carnival. He had husky dogs. It was quite the show, and these kinds of PR stunts would have attracted the attention of the media. Another thing that the government would have done to encourage this, besides perhaps even financing that trip, would be to release these things called mat releases. This is through the NFB. Mat releases are basically like publi reportage, like paid articles, sponsored articles. You would send it out to usually kind of smaller community publications, and those newspapers would use it to fill in some gaps that they might have in their layout. But these mat releases were very visually oriented, as you can see, with some captions, but all meant to promote tourism in Quebec. And here you have one for the carnival, which is, well illustrated. You have the ice sculptures, you have the parade, you have, everything you could want, including Monsieur Ratelle and his bonhomme. We're almost at the end. Again, if you have questions, please jump in. I do want to talk about what we will now call in modern times influencers. This is very big in online digital marketing. The idea being that, if somebody has a YouTube channel or a really popular Instagram account, that brands will want to associate with those influencers, knowing that they have a huge built-in audience, and that simply by, mentioning that they use such and such a brand of soap or ski pole, etc., they may help boost sales for the brand. Well, this idea is not new. People have been influencing others for millennia, and that includes tourism in Laurentians. Some of these faces I know will be familiar, one perhaps may not. A lot of celebrities came to the Laurentians. There were some very rich people with homes here who would welcome them. So Jackie Kennedy came thanks to the Timmins family, who had a home on Lac des Sables. A lot of celebrities, Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, John Wayne, Audrey Hepburn, came to places like Stonehaven. William Fox, who is the gentleman you see below Marilyn's chin there, was the founder and owner of 20th Century Fox, and he had built himself a very large house on Lac des Sables. And so a lot of celebrities came and spent time here. Another place that was very popular for politicians, Lester B. Pearson, etc., the Rockefellers stayed there, was Hôtel Chantecler in Sainte-Adèle, and they were really known for their discretion. So the quote is that the Rockefellers came several times to stay in Chantecler, and it never got media attention. So they're very, very discreet with their guests. Perhaps the most famous person here, I would say, around the world anyway, was Princess Elizabeth, who came with the Duke of Edinburgh. They did a trip the year before her father died. They were in Kenya when he died. So this was the trip, the Commonwealth trip the year prior. The king was quite ill at this time. They had actually flown over. This was the first time that they didn't go by ship. They flew over in case they needed to come back quickly. And one of the places she stayed in her North American tour was Sainte-Adèle. She went to Holy Trinity Church for Mass, but really she had come to stay, to rest for a few days between Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City. So she stayed at a rich gentleman's home. That gentleman was J.W. McConnell, who you may know as a newspaper publisher. He was also the owner of the St. Lawrence Sugar, Redpath Sugar type of, sorry, not Redpath, but the St. Lawrence Sugar Company was a competitor of Redpath, and they stayed in his lodge. I do want to show you something fun. This you'll find online. Unfortunately, it's not a video. But if you can find it, what they've done is they've taken this series of photos and turned it into a GIF. It is the princess here, and it is the snow ride that's described in the article. Royal couple rides in sleigh through Quebec snowstorm. So apparently they came in November, so it would have been snowing by then, and the beautiful trees were laden with snow, and she found it absolutely stunning. Apparently the prince was having a lot of fun and going quite fast in his sleigh. So, young couple having fun's nice to see, but this would have been on the property of McConnell, and normally out of view of the media. When we talk about influencers, we also talk about society pages. Not something we see anymore. I mean, I don't know if society pages, the society section even exists. They existed 20 years ago, but I have to say I haven't noticed them lately. But obviously very, very popular in the 20s, the 30s. Here you have, you know, so-and-so has gone to Europe and stopped by Chalet Cochand on her way home. But now they're back at home. Like, I mean, who tells people? You know, but you want to tell them you've gone on this beautiful trip of Europe, you spent some time at the Chalet Cochand, but now you're home and able to accept social engagement. So this is another type of influence, the Montreal elite influencing their peers, then obviously that would trickle down. So as those peers are shown in the paper, photos of them at Chalet Cochand, might have encouraged others to look at Chalet Cochand as aspirational, perhaps spend some time there, or later when it became possible to do a day trip, go up there to ski. Another way to influence is through your family and friends, and home movies and slideshows were a great way for that to happen. There are great home movies of Chalet Cochand on YouTube if you want to go take a look. The NFB also produced films, a series of films on tourism in the Laurentians, and in fact that was picked up by the American network ABC during their during the Olympic Games. So they showed that as kind of promotional promotional footage of Quebec. So again, an example of how the government helped in the tourism boom of the Laurentians. I want to end, I'm almost done, just with a mention of how important transport was, the development of the Laurentians. Obviously, the train is what made the Laurentians. It finally opened up the Laurentians not only for residential development, for people to go and exile, not exile, but go live there, but also tourism. And that really helped the development of the tourism industry in the first part of the 20th century. And that was down to Curé Labelle and people like him. But then you have the development of the road system. Now, you used to be able to drive up along the 117 from Montreal, but then the highway opened up. And this kind of, it changed a lot. It changed the Laurentians a lot because now people could come up for the day to ski. And this was, in fact, the kind of the death knell of places like Chalet Cochand. They tried to survive, but they didn't succeed because people wouldn't stay at the hotel anymore. They would come up, they would come spend time on the ski slopes, but then drive home. So they weren't spending money in the restaurant, they weren't spending money at the hotel, probably not spending as much money at the gift shop. The income was much less. Louis and Morna, as I said, were very socially engaged. And they liked to live the high life and have friends and things like this. Another one of their problems was that they were a little too generous with bar tabs, and so they would open bar tabs for friends or allow friends to open bar tabs, and then unfortunately those weren't paid at the end. So Chalet Cochand ended up folding. And the building was bought by others. Other kind of initiatives were started. Probably the more successful of them was by Yvan Coutu, who was a kind of phys ed instructor associated with the University of Montreal. And he did a camp in the 60s. And in fact, my mentor was a tennis instructor there. And one of my former colleagues stayed in cottage number 2, he remembers, when he was a little boy. And mine is cottage number 2. So he stayed in what is now my home. So, you know, this idea of opening up the roads, even though it was essential in the early days, really when the highway came and made it so easy for people to come and go, it really had a huge impact on places like Chalet. I want to end this off by recommending some books that, if you're interested in this topic, you should pick up. Robert Prévost wrote a book on the history of tourism in Quebec in general. It's an excellent read. And Michel Allard, our local historian, Le Cœur des Laurentides, also talks about tourism. Both of these are excellent books in French. And in English or bilingual, you'll find our friend Joe Graham's book, also kind of the seminal book as far as I'm concerned for understanding the Laurentians. You also have some books written for smaller municipalities. So you have Anna Dupuis-Zuckerman, who collaborated to write this book about Sainte-Adèle, and Don Stewart for Morin Heights. So if for more local history, I would definitely recommend these books as well. So that ends it at 2:15. So hopefully you have some questions. If there's anything that I can clear up or expand upon, please feel free.
Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. That gave another sight of things that we've heard before in other presentations from the marketing point of view. I found it extremely interesting. And I want to thank Joseph and Sheila for warmly telling or giving me the recommendation to ask you to do a presentation, because it was really, really great. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Yes, hello.
Yes. Do you know anything about La Sapinière that's in Val-David?
David. Yeah, you mean what's happening to it now?
Yes.
Yeah, what's happening to now? From what I understand, now somebody owns La Sapinière and its lands, and has some ideas and projects for development. Within Val-David, from what I can see, there's a bit of discussion in the community about what they would like that property to reflect. So we'll see if there's going to be some kind of community input into what the land and buildings might be used for. Obviously, it was an important piece of Val-David's history. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It was very interesting.
Thank you very much. Sam, unmute yourself. It's intimidating to give a talk like this in front of your former instructor. You're on mute, Sam. You have to unmute yourself. Can you unmute?
Sorry, I hope I didn't mean to intimidate you, but I'm glad you sort of overcome the handicaps you had from your history teacher. But anyway, no, a very, very good presentation. But two questions. Do the Americans still come in any numbers, or have they been sort of forced out by the mass activity? Number one, the Americans. And secondly, what's happened to the cross-country versus downhill ski situation in the winter? You know, what's is it mostly downhill, or you know, when did skiing become differentiated? You know, between downhill and cross-country.
Yeah, so I mean, cross-country skiing.
The American influence.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer your second question first. So, cross-country skiing was popular, and you know, there are stories of people seeing Norwegians and Finnish guys in Quebec doing cross-country skiing, like in the late 1800s or something like that. Very odd, but intrigued people, and so they started cross-country skiing. The downhill skiing came later. You know, we don't have the huge mountains, so when Émile Cochand came from Switzerland, he might have been looking, going, "Oh, okay." Is this a mountain? Like, you know, I'll say to my sister who lives in BC, the mountain's behind my house, and she'll go, "That's a hill." That's a hill. But still, you know, it would have been accessible to Montreal, relatively accessible to the States as well. So I guess a logical place to start up a resort if you're Émile Cochand. So right now, I know there are municipalities, you can do kind of wild cross-country skiing, ski de fond sauvage in the hills behind me, in the Maple Leaf Trails. So people will climb up to the top of the hill, and there used to be 100 or 50 or 100 kilometers of continuous trails there. Now those trails are cut off sometimes by private property, but you can go up and do some kind of wild skiing. People used to also ski, like from Chalet Cochand, they would cross-country ski down to Shawbridge and those areas. You would go across, they would have agreements with farmers and you go across farmers' fields. Now you have associations like the one in Sainte-Adèle, Plein Air, what's the name? Anyway, it's a, kind of a ski association in Sainte-Adèle that maintains some of those trails and also on occasion manages to negotiate with landowners so that they can pass on their land. My neighbor opened up his land for that purpose. So I have, people that will come on his land down to the lake. So you can somewhat do, I don't know how many kilometers you could do, certainly not like you used to. There are some great NFB films, if you can find them, of cross-country skiing in the Laurentians that show people going out for the entire day. And they would have their picnic and, you would leave early in the morning, have your lunch, come back before the sun went down. So that was the cross-country skiing. And then the downhill would have come afterwards. And, obviously that's a little complicated as far as American tourists goes with COVID, that's a little more complicated now. But I did do work for the Quebec Tourism Board, and they definitely invest very heavily in attracting American tourists. Northeast United States is a huge market for them, huge investment as far as promotion goes. So that continues for sure.
If you're interested in looking at some of these old movies, you can find them on the website of the Laurentian Ski Museum.
Oh, fabulous.
We have a lot of movies on our website.
Right.
Fabulous. Yeah, excellent resource.
And actually, if you're interested at all, you should go and visit Laurentian Ski Museum.
Absolutely. Is it open right now?
Yes, it's open. You must phone and make a reservation because of COVID, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But yes, it's open, and there's guided tours, I believe, from Monday to Saturday.
Fabulous. Yeah, it's a really nice little museum and they have so much there. Like it's like going into a candy store. It's a feast for the eyes when you go, and there's a lot for me. I'm particularly interested in Cochand and found a lot there, including I think the record I played for you earlier. They have a copy as well. There are a lot of ephemera and things like trophies and equipment. Lots of fun.
We start from almost before ever. We start from maybe the year, I don't know, 500 or something.
Okay.
Go right up until 1989, I believe.
Yeah, you have a really good team there and fabulous volunteers. So thank you for that. So does that wrap things up, Chloe?
I just want to add something as Joe here about one of the things that happened to cross-country skiing was that there were stories of the real estate development for country cottages often didn't really pay much attention to the fact that their roads were going in and crossing winter trails. And so that the cross-country skiing became more challenged for that reason. But also, of course, downhill skiing was, as you say, a shorter term thing. You could come up a little bit why the southern Laurentians really started to take off as opposed to further north, because you could come up and then go back the same day.
Yeah.
And they introduced night skiing early, which meant after work people could go up, and you can't do that on cross country because there's no lights.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sheila.
So
I love hearing Sheila's voice.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to get close to the microphone. She doesn't. Thank you. This was a really great talk. I really appreciate being able to listen to you.
Well, thanks very much. I think it's a different angle for this, with my PR marketing perspective. But I have such a huge collection. I needed a way to show it to you. So this is
Very, very nice.
So thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you everybody for being here. So this concludes the 2020-2021 lecture series. We won't have a lecture series in April, but we will in May, and it'll be a presentation by Joseph Graham, which I'm very much looking forward to. If you have anyone to recommend for the lecture series, I really, really appreciate recommendations. If you yourself are present at the lecture series and would like to present and have something interesting to share about the Laurentians, we're always looking for new speakers. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was super interesting and a great
Having me.
conclusion. And we will start in May again for 2021 and 2022 lecture series. So you'll get that information soon.
Sam, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about schools. And when and where? Sorry, I don't.
You won't remember me. It was at McGill at the Faculty of Education.
Oh, you were one of the teacher training in the teacher. Oh yeah, no. You maybe. I'm trying to.
It was a long time ago. We won't say how long ago.
One or two of the kids, one or two of the students did really, really well in that. I was. It was quite a sort of divided group, and there was one group who didn't really want to be teachers, and others, like yourself, were very enthusiastic and had